Kevin Andrews, welcome to News 24.
Pleasure.
There are reports both on the weekend and today that you're considering outsourcing some oversight of programs. What exactly are you looking at?
Well, what I'm particularly looking at in my area is cutting out a lot of the burdensome red tape which has been put in place over the last decade or so, of basically saying, particularly to all the organisations in the civil sector, that you're not an agency or arm of government, you exist separately within the community. We should be helping you to do what you do, but we shouldn't be burdening you with extra red tape and regulations.
And is that red tape and regulation mainly involved in the federal bureaucracy overseeing how those programs are run?
Yes, and second guessing a lot of times what's happening in the community organisations.
And you're also thinking, there's also talk you're considering spreading this much wider in areas like health and education, perhaps aged care, and some of the family services you've spoken about, to also have the states oversee some of the programs where federal money is spent?
There's huge duplication in Australia. If you take in the environment area, for example, there are state environmental laws and regulations, there's Commonwealth environmental laws and regulations, there's two sets of bureaucracies. That's really a waste of time, it's unproductive and inefficient.
And that's something the federal government is now working on, but you would look at it, doing it much more broadly across other federal government departments?
For example, let me take a little simple example. An organisation that gets some funding from a Commonwealth department and also gets some funding from a state department currently has to produce two sets of financial reports on top of any other requirements they have. Why can't we simply have one?
Why shouldn't this be seen as cost shifting and responsibility shifting from the federal government to the states and to community groups?
Well, it won't be, because it will involve a lot less burden on the community groups. They are welcoming of this because at the moment they're spending a lot of the money that they get that should be going on service delivery simply reporting to government, and that's what we want to cut out.
But if you're looking at state public servants overseeing some federal spending, this comes at a time when some of the states, particularly Queensland, are slashing their public services by quite a degree.
But there'll be to and fro in this. For example, if you're registered with the Commonwealth, what we're saying to the states equally is, why not just accept the financial and other reporting requirements of the Commonwealth? So we can have it both ways. If your primary responsibility is at a state level, let's work through the states. If your primary responsibility is at Commonwealth level, work through the Commonwealth.
Would this plan help Joe Hockey's proposal to cut the federal bureaucracy by 12,000 public servants?
Look, my aim in putting together a template in this area is not to look primarily at cutting public servants. It's really about how we can be more efficient and productive with taxpayers' money and deliver more services on the ground.
And would it, though, blur the lines of responsibility? For example, if a state was overseeing a program that was federally funded and something went wrong, who would be ultimately responsible for that?
Well, they'll still have to meet the laws and the regulations of the Commonwealth level, so there's still the accountability there. We can have accountability, we can have transparency, but we don't need to duplicate it.
So there's no sense that a state might get the blame instead of the federal government where the rules were set down?
No, I don't think that's going to be the outcome of this. It's going to be simply that people can have an assurance that there won't be unnecessary duplication in the way in which we run the country.
Now, you say you've discussed this with community groups. Do you know if this has been discussed with the states as well?
I'm not sure in other areas. I've discussed it in my portfolio area. So, for example, family service programs that might get funded for activities by both state and Commonwealth. I've had discussions with some of my state colleagues about that.
And do they have any reservations about it?
No, they think it's a good idea. And if we can work together so that we can remove the duplication at both levels, then that will be more efficient.
And if this does come into effect, if you win government, would you have any concerns about the states continuing to cut their own public services?
Well, that's a matter for the states, but the main thing here is that we deliver the services that need to be delivered, and we don't do it in a way which burdens the service deliverers, and we don't do it in a way that requires any additional unnecessary administrative costs.
We've talked about the scope of this. How wide across the federal public service, across the sorts of programs that a federal government runs, can you see this program, this idea spreading?
There's no reason that this approach can't be applied to every area in which the Commonwealth is involved in providing funds for service delivery, because in the end it's about how we can efficiently operate so that more of those funds actually go to services on the ground.
So you could see it spreading quite widely?
Look, I personally would hope so, because there's a lot of inefficiency, there's a lot of unnecessary bureaucracy and red tape. If we can get rid of that, then we're actually doing something of real benefit and value for Australian people.
There have been problems in the past with federal government programs. Your side of politics highlights the schools infrastructure program. There are also, say, problems with aged care that Bronwyn Bishop found out when she was an aged care minister. Wouldn't it be better, though, to have the federal minister, who in the end is ultimately responsible, being able to govern how that oversight happens?
The federal minister will still be responsible. This is a question not of responsibility and accountability. It's a question of how you can put systems in place. And in other places around the world, they do it in a much more efficient way, still have transparency and accountability. For example, if you take something like a financial report, if that has to be put up on an organisation's website, there's more likely to be more transparency than simply asking public servants in Senate estimates questions about which they probably don't know the answer as to what's happening in a particular organisation.
And finally, do you think community groups, often small community groups, are equipped to do this task?
One of the things that I have in mind is to have a specialist education and training charities commission to do that task of helping them to improve their standards, to improve their governance, so that we get a better outcome.
Kevin Andrews, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.